on. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a very special guest, John Treleaven. He is the current chair of the Grumpy Taxpayers of Victoria. And we recently heard about the Grumpy Taxpayers of Victoria and some news items, and they come up at least once or twice a year in conversation in local news when it comes to certain public expenditures, items, and things of that nature. So for all of us like myself who are not familiar with the Grumpy Taxpayers of Victoria, Mr. Treleaven is here to tell us all about that. So welcome to the show, John.
Adrian, thank you very much. And just one tiny correction. It's the Grumpy Taxpayers of Greater Victoria, because the community that we look at is essentially that covered by the CRD.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that correction. That is very important. So
it's actually very interesting, because one of the problems for this community is that there is the city of Victoria, of course.
Right.
But it's only 89,000 people. It is a district in the larger city. But because it carries the name Victoria, and I mean, it's a very important community, I'm not knocking it at all. There are times when the mayor of Victoria, and indeed the council, when they speak to the outside world, they're speaking for the community of 415,000.
Absolutely.
Which they're not. Doesn't take anything away from what they do. But the nature of this community is such that it's difficult to find a political expression, actually, of the broader community. I mean, the CRD, of course, is that expression, but it is really a committee. It's not an elected level of government. And the main aim of the CRD, of course, is to manage and execute integrated service delivery, as we've seen with respect to the sewer system. Not to get into the weeds here, but we all live in Greater Victoria. The economy, there's only one economy in Greater Victoria. There are not 13. Every community contributes and draws from every other community, and that's, of course, a great thing. But politically, and in a policy sense, from time to time, the fact that we are a historic expression of 13 separate municipalities causes issues, as you know.
Right.
And anyway, Grumpy Taxpayers of Greater Victoria, we got started just a little over 6 years ago, if you'd like a little bit of background, at a time when the CRD board, in the first meeting of their new term at that time, doubled their pay.
Wow.
And we thought, perhaps the pay increase, in fact, was warranted. But politically, ethically, the way that should have been done was to increase the pay in the last meeting of the old council, the old board, before the civic election. And then the election is held, and when the new board of the CRD, the 24 of them or whatever, convene, they're being paid more money. We just thought it was unethical, an unethical approach. And so a group of us, following actually a golf game at Cordoba Bay, give them a plug, wonderful course, sat around, and my friend Stan Bartlett, who is, in his professional career, has spent a lot of time as a reporter. Indeed, he and his wife both were reporters with the Regina Leader-Post.
Wow. It
was his suggestion that we establish a society under the Societies Act, and that we essentially, this is kind of my philosophy, we ask questions. We are taxpayers. We have a right to know things. And I was in the Canadian Foreign Service, and I learned very quickly in Japan. I was there for 4 years and worked on it for 7 years, the power of a question. And so we're very careful in what we do to, as often as possible, frame questions, not try to frame answers. We are an advocacy group, but we're an advocacy group for transparency, accountability, respect for the taxpayer's dollar, not for any particular project or direction or We just want the taxpayers' dollars to be respected, and to ensure as much as possible that municipal governments are open and accountable to taxpayers. And actually, we are in our 6th year. We have, thanks largely to Stan's writing style, we have published, we must be 150 press releases, newsletters, probably a little bit more.
Wow.
We have, this started from like 6 or 7 people sitting around having a beer, telling lies to each other about their golf game. They just played, right? But we're very serious. We love Victoria. Of course, many of us have moved here. Victoria is one of the most, Greater Victoria, one of the most marvelous cities in Canada, indeed in the world, and we know that. Indeed, even the issue that comes up from time to time, the 13 municipalities, well, actually, we benefit from 13 different views of lifestyles, right? I mean, I don't have to go to the Napa Valley. I can go to North Saanich to a winery.
Mm-hmm.
I can go into Saanich to a distillery. We can go to a limestone quarry, which is now well, pre-COVID, the most popular tourist attraction in Canada west of Niagara Falls, Butchert Gardens.
Right.
I mean,
wow.
or you can go out to Souk and go north, and you're right on the open Pacific in the same city.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we became interested in issues like service delivery and accountability, feeling that tax dollars are precious and that they should be treated as such by the 91 elected officials in the region. And so from time to time, we have asked questions.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we've got the greatest respect for people who step forward in the electoral process, and indeed for those who are elected.
Mm-hmm.
We are totally nonpartisan. All of our efforts are geared towards really strengthening the ability of councils, and indeed the CRD, except it's just a committee, I know that, to act for and on behalf of the people, the residents, the business owners, and the visitors to Greater Victoria.
John, can I just interject for a second? Just a couple quick questions that
Sure.
I was thinking of, and I'm sure our listeners would like to know as well. Are you, and not to put you on the spot, you can answer in either order, whatever comes to your mind first. But in terms of numbers, like for those of us listening, we hear a lot about public expenditures and 13 municipalities. Do you have any numbers in terms of like revenues or expenditures? Like, what is our tax? Like, does the city of Victoria take in $30 million a year in tax revenues from, property taxes, or like what kind of numbers, are there any numbers that you can give us?
Well, my recollection is for the region, we're talking about $1 billion.
Wow. That's collectively between the 13 municipalities.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's a serious, I mean, we're a major city. We are one of Canada's largest cities as a region, but because regional cities don't count in the Federation of Canadian Municipalities calculation as to who are the largest cities, we're never there.
Interesting.
Because when they look to Victoria, they see the city of 89,000 people.
Right.
I mean, we are a global city. The economy of Greater Victoria is hugely externally focused, and it's very interesting. I mean, whether from the education system right into the high schools. I mean, we educate children in high schools across Greater Victoria from around the world. Mm-hmm. In ways before I kind of discovered this, in ways I could never imagine. Mm-hmm. 2 or 3 years ago, there were 375 international students studying in School District 63. Well, what does that make of School District 63? One of the largest service exporters in Greater Victoria. Never mind the universities and Camosun, not for 1 second undercounting the usual 1 million visitors a year to Butchert Gardens.
Wow.
And then, of course, there's the whole, I mean, it's overused phrase, but the whole high-tech sector, as you know. I mean, Dan Gunn and his colleagues do a wonderful job of portraying the importance of the brains in this wonderful city. There's a fellow by the name of Richard Florida who actually currently teaches at the University of Toronto, in Monk's School. He's an urbanist. And several years ago, I was attending a conference in Des Moines, Iowa, of all things, and he was a speaker I didn't know about.
Wow.
He had just published a book called Creative Communities.
I think I've read some of that book. I recognize the name and everything.
It is brilliant. And by any definition, if you take his grid, Greater Victoria is a creative city. And when we look at the economy, if you look at the impact, I mean, I live in Sydney, and when we moved here in 2005, I was enormously surprised to see on the other side of the Pat Bay Highway, the land around the airport, all these fantastic companies who are selling software, hardware products to the world. 55% of everything manufactured in Greater Victoria is manufactured at the airport in those lands.
Really? Wow.
And the intriguing thing there from a governance perspective was the Sydney Council really governed for the people who lived between the Pat Bay Highway and the Pacific Ocean. They really spent very little time worrying about what was going on the other side of the highway. So what we did to try and correct that, I am on the board of the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. I'm a past president. I suggested to Larry Cross, who had just been elected mayor, and he'd been on our board as a council liaison. There was a meeting at the airport, and I said, Larry, when councillors and new councils are elected, do you ever take a tour of the community? Well, no, because we're all from here. I said, what if the Chamber of Commerce organized a tour of industry for the 3 communities on the peninsula, North Saanich, Central Saanich, and Sydney? So we did that, and we had 9 participants in the first year. We went to 9 businesses in a day, and none of those elected officials had ever been in a business.
Wow.
Other than as a customer. And we've done that now every year for the last 12 years or so. And now pre-COVID, we rent a bus, and we have like 60 people. It's sold out every time.
Wow.
There are amazing stories.
Absolutely.
And one of the goals of what we're trying to do as Grumpy Taxpayers of Greater Victoria is to ensure that everybody in Greater Victoria, especially the elected officials, understands that we're in the same boat. And so it's important for these 13 municipalities to govern as if they had a truly common cause, as opposed to, from time to time, having, struggles.
Right, based on what their political affiliation or sort of ideology.
Well, yeah, but also, I mean, if it's only natural if you're elected as a councillor in Sydney or a councillor in Victoria, you feel yourself accountable to your voters.
You should. You'd think so.
Yeah.
Hope so.
But your voters don't care too much, perhaps, about Saanich or what issue Colwood is facing, and yet their economic future is clearly dependent on all these communities working together to some level of comfort.
Right. Is that not, sorry, and again, for those of us, I moved to Victoria in 2013. I'm still unfamiliar with sort of the workings of the CRD. Is that where the CRD is sort of like it helps dovetail the communities a little bit in terms of governance, or?
Well, but its main aim in life is to encourage and deliver common services. I mean, the board of the CRD, for example, come from the councils, but no one in this city of 415,000 people runs for election citywide, region-wide. Nobody. There are no elections.
Right.
Anyway, so we, in this environment, we grumpy taxpayers, as I say, started asking questions. And of course, one of the first ones we asked was of the CRD board, how could you have given yourself a 100% pay increase after the election? And as we went along, a large number of issues made themselves apparent, and I mean, one of the ones that we took umbrage about actually was that the CRD board in camera voted to conditionally support a proposal by David Black that Greater Victoria host the Pan Am Games in 2024, I think it was.
Right.
And, well, we thought, if you're going to, first of all, that's not the role of the CRD. It is not a regional government. So we thought they took a decision beyond their mandate in camera, where the voters had no chance of knowing what was going on. Now, it was conditional, and I take no credit. I mean, David Black deserves all the credit in the world for trying to pursue this project. Anyway, what we did was we asked the CRD if they could please give us the documentation they had used to affirm a decision, which, by the way, had it all gone through, would have cost CRD taxpayers $25 million contribution to the games. They refused to give us the documentation, so we went to the ombudsman.
Wow.
The ombudsman came back, British Columbia, BC. The ombudsman came back and said, at about that time, David withdrew his project because
Right.
the provincial government, Carol James, one of the first decisions that she made as the new finance minister of the day was that the province of British Columbia didn't have $400 million to give to the games. Anyway, the ombudsman said, well, we won't investigate now because there's no games, but then came back and said, yes, we will. And among other things, I still have in my office here the 318 pages of material that the CRD did give us to document their discussion, but it's fully redacted. And it was redacting the material to us that we took to the CRD and took to the ombudsman and said, this is just wrong. Anyway, we asked the question, right? And when the games didn't happen, David Black gave the grumpy taxpayers of Greater Victoria credit. All we kept asking was, what's the full budget?
Right.
How much is it going to cost?
Right.
And so we now have about 150 or more members. We define members as those who donate to us. We have a board of a half a dozen. We'd like to grow that a little bit to probably 10. We have a reach through our Facebook page of 2,000 to 3,000 hits a month, something like that.
Wow.
We have an email list of several hundred who receive all of our material, and quite a good reaction. We get a good reaction from the local press, as you know. Stan Bartlett writes quite frequently and is published in the Times Colonist. We've been very grateful for CFAX's interest in some of the things that we've been discussing, and we're very interested in a lot of the stuff they're doing. We do recognize when things go extremely well. We're not always critical. Annually, we give out what we call candy cane awards, and
I like the name. What's a candy cane award?
Yeah, well, and normally the recipient gets a box of candy canes, and I've got 2 of them in my office right now, but I can't deliver them because of COVID.
Right.
But to give you an idea, this year for 2020, we recognized the superb work of the South Island Prosperity Partnership in bringing together a recovery team broadly based across the municipalities, of course, and the business community. I think something like 60 or 70 business people have been engaged so far
Wow.
in brainstorming and publishing extremely well-written documents on how to recover from COVID. That is economic recovery,
Right.
reboot. And we thought that was, I mean, SIP itself is a partnership of the municipalities. I think 11 of the 13 are members, and that's really important. And they've got a very sound professional staff and a great board. And in no time at all, they put together this mechanism which is going to yield results for this community for years to come.
Yeah, I've read about them in Douglas Magazine over the years, and
Yeah.
I've always been impressed by sort of the work they do, the conferences they host, or pulling the tech sector together. Or I think they might have a business accelerator program or something too.
Yes, and in the middle of the pandemic, like I think it was December, they worked with the Pacific Northwest Economic Partnership in the Northwest of the United States, right? But
Wow.
that includes provinces of BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and I think Manitoba, and from Idaho to the Pacific, right?
Wow.
A conference that lasted 4 days. That was all online.
Wow.
It was brilliant. I mean, they had the Canadian ambassador to the United States and the U.S. ambassador to Canada speak to a group of business people. This was just one session. And they did something, look, I was in the Foreign Service. I know how these things are. They did something that I have not seen before. They had each of the business groups representing 3 major sectors prepare to take on both of these people on policy issues, one after another. And so instead of having the politicians, but the diplomats with a set piece and then answering random questions from the audience. No, their presentations were followed by 3 very focused discussions on issues facing the economy of both the Pacific Northwest of the United States and the Lower Mainland.
Wow.
Did a great job. And this is in the middle of COVID. And they had like 1,000 participants over the course of the days. So that was great. And we also gave a Candy Cane Award to Victoria Council for what they've been able to do, as we know very well, in Beacon Hill Park, taking the infrastructure expenditure for the sewers, right, which was very disruptive and everything else, tore stuff up. They had no choice, had to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But rebuilding something that the whole community can be proud of.
Absolutely.
So they did a wonderful job.
Mm-hmm.
And the third recipient was Sydney Council. Because in the middle of the pandemic, it became apparent that the business community was going to be seriously compromised by all of this. It's customers that create jobs, not governments and businesses. It's customers, and we told the customers to stay home for public health reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the businesses are going to be in trouble. Well, as far as I know, uniquely in the region, and there won't be that many in Canada, Sydney Council took the decision to cut property tax for 2021, I think 25% below last year's taxes on commercial industrial land.
Oh, that's astonishing, and not just freeze, but actually cut. Because you'll hear about freezes sometimes. It's sort of about not cuts. Yeah, wow.
And this was on commercial industrial land. Yeah, they did that. Oh. And I well recall Cliff McNeil Smith is the mayor, and I watched the debate on their web streaming, and he said at the time, and he was dead right, he said, there's not much municipalities can do in these circumstances, because we do look to the provinces and the federal government for the major risk mitigation measures.
Mm-hmm.
But this we can do. And they did it.
Wow.
And I think that's terrific. Oh, and they followed that up. They've also suspended business license fees for 2021.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is in here. So, we grumpy taxpayers, of course, are focused on good things, but we're focused on stuff that really is. Oh, I mean, look at the Blue Bridge in Victoria,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, it's came in at what, double the price, and it was a major capital project, which, by the way, should have been funded by the region, but of course the other 12 municipalities basically stood back and said, "Oh, not our problem."
Interesting.
Meanwhile, we're going over it all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were looking forward very much to the Office of the Auditor General of Local Government doing an audit on the Blue Bridge project. Not a financial audit, but a value for money audit.
Mm-hmm.
We as taxpayers. And to our chagrin, the provincial government, sometime in the middle of last year, announced that they were going to wind up the Office of the Auditor General for Local Government that had been established about 3 years earlier by the BC Liberal government at the time.
Right.
And that the Blue Bridge audit was to be the last audit they would do. Well, they never got a chance to do it. They're closing down.
I'd heard of this, yeah.
And if you're an organization like the Grumpy Taxpayers, who are very interested in transparency, it strikes us as extremely weird that the province would shut down the agency, particularly in that a year before the announcement of the closure, the agency was subject to an independent review, and it came out with flying colors. It's in business to do what? Strengthen local governments, right? Help them. Not take people and criticize them and stuff. Help them. Well, that's what we're trying to do.
So this is like quite alarming for me listening. I mean, I'm not sure if anyone else has this question, but if the Office of the Auditor General, does that mean we no longer have a provincial Office of the Auditor General?
No, this is the Auditor General for local government.
Oh, okay. So it's a separate sort of branch. Do we have an Auditor General's office provincially, right?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not entirely clear, what will emerge on the other side, but we're trying to make as much noise as we can about this because there's an important reason for auditors general. There's an important, the city of Greater Toronto, which you can imagine, right? 3.5 million people. There's an Office of the Auditor General for Greater Toronto, and that's how big the expenditure is.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're quite dismayed at the decision, and look forward to whatever the current provincial government plans to announce to replace the function. There's just no question that on a budget of about $1 billion or whatever, that local governments across the province need the assistance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's I'll stay tuned for that news as well. That's I'm curious to see what happens. But basically, yeah, it's for greater transparency. Yeah, I mean,
yes, exactly. And I mean, the Blue Bridge project was a big project.
Absolutely.
And probably, the city of Victoria, which is only a little population of 89,000, probably that stretched their IP, and that's not a criticism. I'm not criticizing them at all. They did the best they could, but boy, it's hard. And like any other large contract, you run into unanticipated circumstances, which they clearly did. And,
well, I've highlighted that as something to look into further. I usually include links at the bottom of the video in the description, and so the Blue Bridge project and such. I know there's a fellow, he writes for, I think it's, what's the name of that local magazine? Is it Focus Magazine?
Yes.
I think his name is, I'd be totally mistaken, David Broadbent, possibly, something like that. And I've read some, he's written quite in-depth articles about the Blue Bridge project and all that, so maybe I'll try and get him on for an interview. But I will include a link about that, because that was big. And also the South Island Prosperity Partnership and everything else we've talked about. I'm taking good notes.
Oh yeah, read their series of reports on economic recovery from COVID. They're extremely good. And I mean, the tough part comes now, because executing is always tougher than thinking. But they've done the thinking and the analysis, and it's been largely written by business leaders across the city, the greater city, and that's terrific.
No, that sounds really good. I'll put that up. I'll find the link for the recovery plan, and other folks can have a look at that as well.
Yeah,
that's great. Let's just have a totally random segue here. I'm going to throw. It's not a curveball. I read on your bio, and I'd like you to speak to us a bit more about your biography as well, if you wouldn't mind. But sure. Melinda's Biscotti. I understand that you brought some Melinda's Biscotti product to some sort of a conference or event, and you sent, and the president or prime minister of Italy, himself or herself had sampled the product. Tell us about Melinda's Biscotti. We'll give them a plug as a local business, because I read about them in Douglas Magazine, a few years back when they were really picking up, and it's been a fantastic success story, and that is in your sort of region of our area of our region. So yeah, tell us about them.
Yeah, well, I already mentioned that I went through this epiphany once I crossed the Pat Bay Highway and saw, Viking Aviation and Quester Tangent and a whole bunch of fantastic businesses. And early on, when I was as a director of the chamber, I ran into Alan Hodgson and Melinda. And when they were in one of those rental units, industrial rental units, and Melinda Cowden, by the way. And it just so happened that I was invited to speak to the G20 student gathering. Now, when Canada hosted the G20 in Huntsville, up north, right, the Prime Minister asked each of his G20 leaders to invite 10 students to come to Canada and learn about the country and all that sort of good stuff. And part of that was a conference for a day in the red zone. It was all an experience for me, of course, but in the red zone in Toronto. And we had a table of 10 people from each of the G20 countries. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I want to talk this was in the 2008, 2009, the slump, right? Everything was, until COVID, it was the worst crash since, 1986 or something. Everybody was gloomy. No. And yet, when I went across the highway here, I talked to business people who never read the New York Times, didn't read the Wall Street Journal. They ran their business, and their business was doing well. So I asked Alan and Melinda if I could buy 350 biscotti, which I put in a suitcase, took with me, and on the Saturday morning, we were taken into the red zone, and of course it's all our CMP and stuff, and I'm the only guy around carrying a suitcase. So I got a good deal of attention.
I'll bet, yeah.
I opened it up, and the RCMP, what's all this? Well, I told them the story of Melinda's Biscotti.
Wow.
Where Melinda started it in her kitchen. She loved making biscotti. She would occasionally take them to the office. She was an employee of VIHA, right? Non-medical employee of VIHA. And this is how business starts. People got to know that she made biscotti, and one day she's sitting in her cubicle, this is a true story, and a $20 bill comes over the wall. And she said, and there was a surgeon there who said, well, geez, I'm having a dinner party. I'd love to serve some of your biscotti. Well, she threw the money back and made biscotti for him. Wow. But from there, her business grew.
Absolutely.
So when I got to the lecture hall, I laid out Melinda's Biscotti. Well, I had about 250 units. And then I built my speech to these folks around talking to entrepreneurs. Don't just read the New York. Don't just read the Wall Street Journal. Don't just read the Financial. These are all good newspapers. But talk to people who are doing business every day and see how they're doing. Find the stories. talk to the entrepreneurs. Frankly, that's what I did when I went across the highway here for the first time and found all these wonderful businesses. And I particularly turned to the Italian table and I said, look, these are biscotti from Canada. You have got to taste these and give us an opinion. Are these good or what? They're brilliant, by the way. They're lovely. And Alan and Melinda have gone on to they're still making biscotti, and they run a wonderful restaurant, and it's getting stronger all the time. They're a very high quality product that came from their kitchen. And so I tried to turn that into the message of, in this gloom and doom, there are success stories. Go and talk to the companies. Don't just stop at, the central banker's prediction of GDP and stuff. So yes, I did. And I have to say that I charged Foreign Affairs for the biscotti, and I presented a check
Nice.
to Alan and Melinda when I returned.
Wow. That's a great story, John. And there's some wisdom in there, I think, as well for folks listening. And as we are in sort of a parallel situation here.
Yes. Yes.
We can pull out of these times with some good entrepreneurship and local business. So.
Yeah, well, in these troubled times, though, I would direct our listeners, to SIP again, South Island Prosperity Partnership. One of the things they've done on their website is they have, a dashboard. Well, everybody's got a dashboard. But they've got 5 or 6 charts which track numbers that matter to the whole economy. I mean, you can imagine what they are, but one of them clearly is passengers going through the Victoria Airport.
Interesting.
Now, you don't have to be an economist to look at those charts and say, either it's getting better. They track real estate, for example, value, but other things as well. And you think, okay, wait a minute, I might be doing okay in my sign business right now, but if the Victoria Airport has only got 1,000 people going through it when it should have 8,000, we're not there yet. So it's a good place to look. And I think they've done quite a good job of. And this is, of course, without editorial comment. This is just here are the numbers, and they refresh them every month. So we're talking a lot about the economy. This is one of the things that kind of bothers me and bothers we grumpy taxpayers a little bit. The truth is that the most important level of government, and this is what I learned going across the highway, because I used to be in the federal government. I was in the Trade Commissioner Service. Then I ran the Saskatchewan Trade and Export Partnership for 5 years, so I got the provincial flavor. But only moving here did I understand that for the success or failure of a business, it's municipal government that matters the most,
right,
among the 3 levels of government.
And you don't often hear that.
That's right. That's right. But it is exactly why, if I was being rhetorical, I would say, why do we need an office of the Auditor General of Local Government? Because if the municipalities are not being run optimally, I'm not talking about direction or policy or choices, right? Just election held, policy agreed, and executed, right? So if we don't have well-run municipalities, the economy suffers, because the economy of British Columbia is only created in the municipalities. It's not created in the province. The provincial economy is a statistical amalgamation, or a statistical expression of what happens in the 63 municipalities. And the national economy, of course, is the provincial economies added up in the 10 provinces and 3 territories. It all happens at the local level.
That's absolutely true.
And too many municipalities, to go back to the very part of our conversation, don't seem to understand that. And so you get all kinds of, what got me very interested in how municipal governments interact with provinces actually was years ago here, just after I joined the Chamber of Commerce. The town of Sydney decided they needed a new signage bylaw. Okay, well, I read it. 14 pages, single-spaced, of signage bylaw. And I said to myself, what the hell is this? I mean, and by the way, 99% of it was aimed at the businesses, not at homeowners.
Right.
And from that moment on, I started asking questions about cumbersome municipal regulatory environments and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that led into some of the questions that we ask about as grumpy taxpayers. So, business friendly, tax efficient, service delivery efficient, that's what we need to have a robust and healthy economy in which, of course, we all, one way or another, can achieve our dreams for ourselves, for our families. I mean, we've experimented right now with COVID to see what happens in a community when you anesthetize the private sector, the business community. And we had to for public health reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's not pretty. So what we're after as grumpy taxpayers is an environment in which everybody achieves their dreams. And not always easy. And as I always tell people, you know, if you've got a politician on speed dial, chances are it's your municipal councillor, not your MLA or your MP.
Absolutely.
You know? So it's extremely, extremely important. And frankly, we do whatever we can to strengthen the ability of elected politicians to do a job. I don't want to. I mean, that's what we're about.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything you said, I mean, I'd like to think, like, for me as a listener and for anyone else listening, sounds pretty reasonable and neutral. You guys do bill yourselves as nonpartisan. Tell us a bit about that too. I mean, we are in a time of polarized politics, especially sort of here in the District of Victoria in particular. Are there ways, like, are we sort of on the same side with some of the stuff, or are we so different when it comes to our viewpoints on these types of things?
Well, if you're talking about the Victoria Council,
or in general, just like local government, there's a lot in the news these days about, who's spending what on what. Like, we hear about the free lunches for instance, for Victoria City Council. Basically, I'm trying to ask, because you guys bill yourselves as nonpartisan. I really appreciate that, because I think we need more of that. That sort of gets to the nuts and bolts of the issue and sort of puts aside the differences. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you guys, what approach do you take to sort of be nonpartisan? Like, how does an organization in this day and age, especially one concerned about public finances, be nonpartisan?
Well, but we try, as you've seen. If you go onto our website, grumpytaxpayers.com, you'll see, as I say, like about 150 or more press releases and newsletters that we have issued.
Mm-hmm.
The one that came out today was again stating the obvious, that Langford Council should install web streaming.
Mm-hmm.
For purposes of what? Transparency, accountability, give the citizens an idea of how difficult it is to make decisions at a municipal council.
Mm-hmm. Something
that a TELUS phone line doesn't convey.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I say, we're doing everything we can as a small group of people to keep the ball moving in one direction, and that direction is a strengthened local governance structure and performance.
I don't want to return to anything negative. So there was a question we had talked about previously about highlighting some sort of cringeworthy public expenditures. I'm happy to have you point some out if you like, but I'm sure people can find that information on your website and in your newsletter by subscribing.
Oh yes, yeah. Just go on and if you give us your email, then you'll get them automatically. There are a number. For a very long time, until the province stepped in, of course, the whole sewer project was at risk. But at least appearances to the contrary. It looks like this has been. Well, I think it has been very well managed. Once the province stepped in, the project's been very well managed,
mm-hmm.
and it seems to be coming in at roughly the target price. That's terrific. We've already mentioned the Blue Bridge. you don't want to get picky, but for example, the Crystal Pool in
Right. Yeah.
Victoria. I mean, the council has spent something like $2 million, and they're no closer to having a replacement for the Crystal Pool.
Yeah, I understand something about the initial architect's plans, like that all sort of went to the side. That was $80,000 or something, and then sort of we missed a window or something for some federal funding that we could have secured.
Yeah, I mean, it just didn't work very well. Now, more generally, however, listen, we have 415,000 people live in Greater Victoria. Live, work, study, make a living, achieve their family dreams in Greater Victoria. We are the most over-serviced jurisdiction of that size in the country. What do I mean by that? Well, because of the 13 municipalities and the electoral districts, we have 15 fire chiefs.
Wow.
We have 5 police forces. We have like 18 parks and recreations departments. I already said it's a lovely place to live. There's no question about it. But in a post-COVID world in which, in many cases, municipal revenues are going to be put under great stress, it's time to look at service integration. And Christy Clark's government executed a study on service integration in Greater Victoria and then refused to publish the report before the election, which she lost. To their credit, John Horgan's government published the report.
Interesting.
That report was widely consulted. They went to every municipal council. They had a meeting with the Grumpy Taxpayers of Greater Victoria,
Wow.
their consultants, as they were putting it together. It is very well written. It doesn't create a menu for service integration. What it does is create a list by sector of all of the opportunities for service integration.
Fascinating.
That report, once produced, has never been tabled at a single municipal council.
Wow.
It has never been tabled at the CRD board. It was, give the current government credit, they dusted it off and they published it. Nothing has happened. We have huge opportunities in Greater Victoria to create a more efficient service delivery model. And,
And you
so I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is continually refer to the report, that maybe someday somebody will be embarrassed enough that they'll open it up and see what can be done.
you've used the word service integration, John. Just for the folks listening, I'm assuming we're talking about the amalgamation question.
No,
Oh,
no, this is not a political amalgamation.
okay.
No. And there's no need for that. And I shouldn't say there's no need for it. There may well be. And as you know, Victoria and Saanich are going through a process at the moment to study the benefits of so doing. But before the Harris government created the GTA, which they did by fiat, 70% of the municipal services across all those municipalities were integrated.
Oh,
They didn't have 17 police forces. We have 5. They had 1.
so there's a way to integrate services without amalgamating.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
And if you look at it, we are, of course, in a seismic zone, right? So, in fact, dispersed service delivery model is the one we've got to stick with. So in looking, for example, at fire services, I'm not talking about closing down fire departments and, selling trucks and stuff. Not at all. But do we need 15 fire chiefs for 415,000 people? Those are the kind of issues that we continue to go back to, recognizing that there's a lot of inertia. But over time, this community will grow together more than it has. And there will be fits and starts, but it will happen. And what we're trying to do on the service, not on amalgamation, but on the service delivery side, is ensure. I mean, for example, I lived in Ottawa when it was unamalgamated. Now there was a municipal police force, but region, the Ottawa region, had 11 different definitions of a parking space.
Wow.
Give me a break, right?
Yeah.
Because, as I said earlier in this discussion, there's only one economy. And, we have to got to understand that there's a lot of overhead imposed on businesses, which then compromises the healthcare system and compromises the education system and, the police force and all that, when we put those kind of barriers in place.
And the end user is impacted as well. Service delivery, product prices.
Totally. And there's only one taxpayer, that'd be you and I. And so we end up paying the bill. And you and I and everybody else who lives in this wonderful, wonderful community, we deserve an adult conversation on taxes, the need for them, and the best way to invest them. And that dialogue will continue for quite some time. And there are, obviously, lots of people interested. We get a reasonable reaction to much of what we write, and then occasionally we run across something that is just truly strange. Like, why would Langford Council resist for years putting webcasting in? Like, give me a break.
Right.
Oh, well, nobody's ever asked, said the mayor. Well, that's not true. Well, it's expensive. But wait a minute. The provincial government gave each of these municipalities, in the case of Sydney, it's $2.6 million. Langford got more money to permit expenditures to mitigate the effects of COVID, including specifically the ability of citizens to access council meetings and other, public consultations.
Interesting.
So they've got the money.
And at this point, people in Langford who want to listen in or to witness sort of council hearings in Langford, is that by phone? Then they can listen in.
Yes. Yeah. You phone in, and anyway, not to put them too much on the spotlight, but it's just very, very strange when in any of the councils around here, most of them in the region, you can go in and you can look at last week's council. You can see, this is what really bothers me, you can see the struggles that municipal councils have in coming to make policy recommendations. This is tough work.
Right.
You've got lots to balance. Well, it's there in the camera. You can watch them coming to those decisions. I think that's to the benefit of everybody, including the council members.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so occasionally issues like that, we call them coconuts, drop on our head, and we go in and say, hey, for transparency, accountability, we're not criticizing Langford at all. They're a marvelous community. I go there to shop all the time. It's fantastic. Anyway, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, on that sort of. So, again, just to finish on my earlier question, I guess, about being nonpartisan. I'd like to think, from what I've heard from you and what I've read on your website, you're a nonpartisan organization. You're looking out for everybody's interests. It's for transparency, service efficiency and service delivery, efficiency and the spending of public money.
Yeah,
all good stuff, right?
Yeah, and I am of a certain age, and I'm in receipt of a pension, right?
Right.
Where does my pension come from? It doesn't come from government. It comes from the economy. It comes from having, the fortune of being born in Canada, living in a community as wonderful as Greater Victoria in the province of British Columbia, which we love. And it's the economy of Canada that produces the income for me to have a pension.
Right.
So the more efficiently we can do things, the more we can get together with common objectives, the better off we will all be.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to disturb the fantastic lifestyle that this wonderful community and beautiful province and great country provide us.
Absolutely. So on that positive note, just curious what we can look forward to. I guess I've got two questions left here. One is sort of matters of sort of that the Grumpy Taxpayers of Greater Victoria would look at normally what should we be on the lookout as residents of the Greater Victoria region for in 2021, the year ahead here that we've just started? What sort of, do we have any big votes coming up or any big public spending projects or things that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, I think what we've got, most regrettably, since we're still not finished with this pandemic, I mean, the virus is in control right now. We're not. We're trying to be, and hopefully, God willing, with vaccinations and stuff, we can get back on top of it. But in the meantime, looking at municipalities, we think they're going to have ongoing revenue issues.
Right.
And we think that the stress that we've seen on the private sector, on businesses, will not end easily. And we're going to be watching very carefully the choices, particularly that the major municipalities make, in terms of how to cut the pattern to fit the cloth. Across Canada, other municipalities have had to undergo fairly substantial cutbacks. We have been able to avoid that for the most part.
Wow.
In Greater Victoria. I've already outlined where I think there's a reasonable opportunity for some very significant savings in terms of streamlining service delivery across the 13 municipalities. At least it deserves a look. At least the report deserves to be tabled and discussed.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that we in the words of Bonnie Henry, I mean, one of her admonitions to everybody is to be kind. Well, I think we are being kind, and I think we want to be sure that coming out of this, municipalities remain strong and their businesses remain strong. And maybe this is a moment to take a look at service integration, right, and other ways to streamline and reduce the costs to taxpayers and the money that's being the monies that are remitted from businesses to municipal coffers.
Very interesting. The optimist in me hopes for that. I mean, I feel like this is a time of adversity, and if we can find an opportunity in this and actually come out of the COVID impacts with something better than we had before, that would be amazing.
Well, yes, and this is true. We have to look within ourselves because, as already mentioned, I mean, Greater Victoria's economy is very externally focused. Well, so is Canada's. Mm-hmm. Somewhere between 30 and 45% of our GDP is involved in international trade.
Wow. But
at the moment, as we've seen, I mean, tourism is very clear, but borders are thickening, and there is renewed voices, of course, for protectionism, and, right, and there are areas now that will be of declared of strategic interest. Of course, healthcare, mm-hmm, PPE, that's a natural. But generally speaking, borders are getting thicker, mm-hmm, and we therefore have got to at least be able to depend on each other.
Right.
Meaning that at the municipal level, we've got to be as efficient as possible, and I outlined where we might find some opportunities in Greater Victoria. Interprovincial trade barriers have got to come down in Canada. Why do we protect each other from each other? Well, it's history, right? It's going back to 1867. That's all it is. And to give them credit, British Columbia and Alberta have signed and have implemented an interprovincial free trade zone, which is a model for everybody else to follow.
It's astonishing that wouldn't be across the board. I mean, to think that there would be, tariffs or like surcharges on levies and stuff in between provinces, to me seems outlandish.
And buy local. And well, the Chinese have an expression: the local ginger is not so hot. So they look elsewhere for good stuff. We from time to time do the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's just that we think somehow, I don't know, Saskatchewan. Well, why would we do business with them? Come on, they're Canadians like us.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, not to belabor the point, but we do have to look within ourselves as much as possible for efficiencies and ways to preserve the lifestyle that we enjoy, so that then we're better equipped to tackle an increasingly difficult international trade environment, which we can't ignore because that's how we earn a living.
Absolutely. On top of coming out of the COVID and the economic impact there.
Exactly. This is a time for wisdom and vision in government. And we've got to respect people who are leading us and cut them some slack. There are going to be mistakes, but we don't have any choice. We're in a war.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll know when this is over who the best generals were. You can't write the history of a war till it's over.
Very true.
During the war, you do what you got to do. And I mean, we're so blessed in this country, in this province, and in this community to have strong leaders who are taking very tough decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got to cut slack for everybody and recognize we've got to come out of this stronger, even if it means we've got to change some of the ways we've been doing things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there was two good ones there, I guess. That just to highlight. So things we should be on the lookout for in 2021 is sort of looking within ourselves, sort of in terms of coming together as communities, maybe in terms of fostering, supporting local business. We see a big push on Facebook for supporting local business, which I think is fantastic. I think a lot of local businesses have actually fared quite well. Some local businesses have fared quite well during these times.
Yes.
And so that sort of thing, removing sort of some of the barriers and maybe some of the red tape for businesses to get back on track.
Please, yeah. And by the way, my local includes Ontario, right? We talk Canada.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because like you mentioned PPE, I think in Vancouver there were some factories or something that was converted to produce N95 masks and things like that.
There will be very fundamental changes in some of the supply chains that have been established over the last sort of 30 years. Absolutely. Right. And we will agree, there will be no upset, we will agree to pay more for product that we know we must have national access to. That's just the way it's going to be. And indeed, I mean, shop local. Mm-hmm. I live in the Saanich Peninsula. I mean, what a privilege to be able to eat garden fresh vegetables from Mitchell's Farms and others, even if they cost a little bit more.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to pay that, right? And I'm proud that I live in a place that has such rich agriculture base. Now, it's not enough to feed the world. Saskatchewan has 8 times more agricultural land than the province of Ontario does.
Wow.
I mean, it's got 50% of Canada's arable land. That's important. But so is the ALR.
Yeah.
For all it contributes to the lifestyle that we all enjoy.
Yeah, no, I hope everyone listening has just sort of that's reaffirmed for me the importance of local business. My wife and I run a small local business, and I meet a lot of people who run small businesses, and I'm always in admiration and take my hats off. It's a tough slog. And to think that on top of with COVID, sort of just as an extra barrier, and then just the rewarding factor of when you hand that money over, that's to a local employee, a local business, they raise their families here, they buy property here, they've got their communities here. That money largely stays in the community. Sure,
and my lifestyle in Sydney is directly dependent on, among other places, Beacon Avenue and Bevan Avenue, where the businesses are. And the entrepreneurs who have a better idea of doing what? Well, purveyor of tea, Janet's Specialty Tea Shop. You get the teas of the world. And I hope that during this COVID pandemic, we've all begun to realize how absolutely important local choice is. And we're all going to shop online. That's true. And by the way, we're going to go to Langford and shop in big box stores. That's okay too. But we all benefit when the business community thrives, because when they thrive, we thrive, and they are us.
Absolutely. And that's sort of part of the mandate of, I don't want to take away from, we've talked a lot about local business here, and I don't want to take away from the Grumpy Taxpayers of Greater Victoria, sort of your mandate. So, promoting local business, that is sort of within, but you serve on a local chamber of commerce. Is that Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
So,
I'm a member actually of the Victoria Chamber and sit on their policy committee, and I'm a director of the Spanish Peninsula Chamber. Yeah, I mean, in the end, Grumpy Taxpayers is about strengthening local communities to the benefit of all of us, including the businesses.
right. And yeah, you can't really talk about one without the other. So I
Yeah,
hope.
absolutely. And if we've learned nothing else through the pandemic, as I said before, it is the symbiotic relationship is so very important. I
Mhm,
mean, we are paying now more for stuff from small businesses than we probably used to.
mhm.
But we're happy to do it because we've all recognized if in the case of Sydney, if Beacon Avenue closed down,
Yeah,
what do we got?
it'd be devastating.
Yeah. And,
And,
and, and in the way, so we honor the vision of the entrepreneurs who are there, and there are more coming and all that. And we honor the work of everybody who takes into their professional lives the need to serve the needs of customers.
mhm. Yeah, no, and that definitely fulfills a community need, and we forget about that. A business provides a good or a service to the community, so
Yeah.
and a job sometimes too. So on that very positive note as well, I feel like I took away from the Grumpy Taxpayers of Victoria a little bit, just in terms of for us, I don't really know of any other advocacy organization at our level here regionally that sort of keeps an eye on these things, puts the magnifying glass or the microscope or the spotlight on.
Well, I think that there isn't. I think that's one of the things that we have discovered over the years. And I mean, I'm not taking credit for this. We remarkably, through the efforts of a number of people, a fairly small group, but a number of people with inquiring minds and a quick wit and the ability to write, and that's largely Stan, we've been able to, for coming into 6 years now, ask questions and build a certain confidence in people who read our material that we don't have an agenda. The agenda we have is that the community and everybody in it succeeds. And where we find stuff that issues or investments or policies that in the end hinder the community,
It's the detriment of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'll leave you with one thought about the fractured governance. We are in a seismic zone, correct? One day, God forbid that you and I and our families should be alive. One day, there's going to be one hell of an earthquake. Okay, the fractured governance. This is service delivery. There has never been an exercise involving all the emergency services across Greater Victoria to simulate an earthquake.
That's frightening. But yeah.
Never, not once.
Wow.
The municipalities on the Saanich Peninsula, the fire services, they do that. The airport, of course, has a regular routine of exercises for their people. And so at its fundamental, what is the role of local government if it isn't preserving the safety of the citizens? And so why I would go back to that report on service integration, there's got to be a reason why there's never an exercise. One of the reasons might be 15 fire departments.
Interesting.
How to get them together. Just saying, those are the kind of governance issues that we look at.
No, you've left me with some stark thoughts. So, and I hope other people listening have maybe it's given them pause for thought. One last note I'll make before we just talk about sort of if anyone wants to get involved with the Grumpy Taxpayers. But one last note I wanted to make was, I was just thinking as you were speaking about sort of, the Grumpy Taxpayers of Victoria being sort of one of the only organizations, or perhaps the only advocacy organization of that nature in our area. The Washington Post, their tagline is "Democracy dies in darkness," and I think back to the Victoria by-election we just had, and I believe the turnout was 17%, or was it 27%? It was one or the other. I think it was 17%. I was astonished. And I mean, in the past two elections or something too, it's been like 30, 40%. So, I think it's important as a society that we have organizations sort of that, as difficult of a job as it is for our elected officials to do their jobs. And I totally respect the vocation. It's definitely a challenge. There's time away from their families. It's stressful, but to keep their toes to the fire and sort of, bring issues to light that they may have forgotten about or tried to sweep under the rug. It's important for all of us in democracy, but we also need to get involved with organizations like the Grumpy Taxpayers, I think.
Yeah, well, we welcome the involvement. I mean, when we pick an issue, everybody contributes, and as I say, since we don't have an agenda in a political sense, all we're looking for is what kind of common sense suggestions can we make, and Stan is a journalist, and we do look for hooks. And as, for example, when the Langford Council, again, not to beat them, but decided at a meeting late last year in camera to reject webcasting, what did we say? How can you discuss in camera the need for increased transparency?
Well, ironic. Well, ironic.
You can't do that. Anyway. Well, thank you very much for the time, Adrian. And I appreciate what you're doing with your podcast, and picking out the governing in the sunshine is a good tagline, actually.
Governing in the sunshine. I like that. It's nice. So, and in the same way that your organization tries to shed the spotlight on those issues, I try and shed the spotlight on local organizations and folks like yourself too. And I think I've got some fantastic material here to follow up with the South Island Prosperity Partnership, and maybe you can just hang on the line after and we can just sign off. But if we can look at maybe pursuing some of those. So thank you, everyone. That's John Treleaven. And John, I'll let you sign off, but sorry, give us so you're with the Victoria Chamber of Commerce and the Saanich-Palencia Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a director of the Forum for International Trade Training and all that. I mean, I did have a 32-year career in the Foreign Service, and I always believe the world is round. At the moment, south of the border, there are people who think it's flat.
Yeah, we have some in Canada too, I believe. But
we do, and I just want to make sure that political leaders across the CRD also recognize the world's round.
Right. You're saying we're all interconnected, or
absolutely,
yeah,
totally. The strength of one builds the other, and that's the philosophy behind SIP. South Island Prosperity Partnership, and we have a wonderful future. But there'll be some challenges, and just take a look at a web broadcast of a city council meeting. It is a tough place to make decisions.
Yeah, that's a great exercise. I've lived here for 7.5 years now, and I've never done that. So there's something, I don't even think I ever made it down to a council session. So, I mean, me who considers myself, I like to consider myself somewhat knowledgeable of civic affairs, or I try to engage. I haven't even been to one. So I feel like for all of us, maybe that's an exercise for 2021 is to make a point to watch. I mean, how convenient is that? You sit around your pajamas, bowl of popcorn, and you can watch a council section. So, yeah. All right. Well,
thank you very much for reaching out, and for your listeners, look up www.grumpytaxpayers.com, and if you're interested, read what we write from time to time. If you want to receive it in your in basket, register, and membership is only a donation away. We are registered under the Societies Act of BC. So everything is quite transparent, and we run a very open organization.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure.